Hi again. So we've already seen in the video that you watched before today's lesson that transitional words and phrases help you to guide your reader from one thought to another when you're writing. And you've also seen that they allow you to arrange your ideas in a clear and meaningful way that the reader can easily follow. So in this way, I want you to think about transitional words and phrases like signposts on a journey. So not only do transitional words and phrases keep the reader moving in the right direction as they progress through reading your text, but they also let the reader know where they're headed in the text. Your reader can become lost and confused without these transitional words and phrases, so that's why they're really important. In the video, you also heard about 4 of the main functions of transitional words and phrases, and in class, before watching this video now, you've also developed a bank of words and phrases that you can use in your own writing, and you can refer to that when you're doing your own pieces. So now we're going to use this sheet here, using transitional words and phrases to improve your writing. We're going to use this here to have a look at 2 examples where, in example 1, where there's no real use of transitional words and phrases, and then in example 2, where there are some examples. I'm going to begin by looking at this first example here, example 1. I'm going to read through it for you. You've been given a handout of this in class, so just be reading along either on the screen or on that piece of paper as I'm going through this. After I've finished it, I'm going to point out what some of the problems are with this first piece here. Okay. So, public transportation is often used by university students for travel between their home and university or place of study. There are many advantages to university students who use public transport. It helps build a sense of community. When people travel together on trains or buses, they have the chance to interact with and get to know the people who live in their community. Public transport encourages people to have a more active lifestyle. Commuters can walk or cycle to their bus or train stop. The economic benefits are important to students. The cost of public transport is significantly cheaper than owning and running a car. Public transport has a number of disadvantages for students. The time it takes to commute can be significantly longer than driving. Safety on public transport can be a concern for some students if they travel late at night. Public transport offers students a reliable and inexpensive means of attending university, and the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Alright, so we've read through this piece of writing here, and as I said before, it doesn't contain any transitional words or phrases or uses them minimally. Alright, so an easy way to improve this piece of writing would actually be to include some transitional words and phrases. Good writers will use appropriate transitions, and they'll also vary them. So that means that they will change the transitional words and phrases that they're using. They won't use the same ones over and over again. So they will vary them according to their function and the meaning of them. So depending on what you want to accomplish with your piece of writing, the easiest way to improve it is going to be to simply add some of these transitional phrases. So words like also, although, besides, for instance, for example. And using these, a really easy way to use these is to use them at the beginning of a sentence, or at the beginning of a paragraph even, to provide more information and to link the ideas, or to give an example that demonstrates the point that you're trying to make. But to make your writing even more sophisticated, we can vary where we're using them, and we can use transitional words and phrases within a sentence as well, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. All right, but you can see here, so for example, in this first paragraph we'll look at first, where we're talking about the advantages of using public transport for university students, we've got sort of 3 different things going on here, but it was actually a bit difficult for me to read because we started off with looking at some of the social benefits. So it helps to build a sense of community. When people travel together on trains or buses, they have the chance to interact with and get to know the people who live in their community. And then it goes on to more the lifestyle benefits here, but it just went on to read public transport encourages people to have a more active lifestyle. So it would have helped to have a transitional word or phrase there just to signpost to the reader that you are going to move on to another point. So something like in addition, okay? And it was also quite confusing as reading through the 3 different paragraphs. So this one looks at advantages, as we said, and this one, it's clear from the start that it's looking at disadvantages, but it could have used a word to show the contrast between those two really early on here. So using something like, although public transport has advantages, there's also a number of disadvantages. Okay, just to make that clearer. Now, it's also not clear that this last paragraph here is a conclusion. We need some sort of word or phrase to signpost that we're wrapping up what we're saying and we're reiterating the main point of this piece. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at a better example, in example 2. And this one does use transitional words and phrases to improve the piece of writing here. I've listed the 4 functions that we've looked at down here, and I'm actually going to highlight these in different colours. I won't do it that way. I'll do it this way. So we've got the addition of ideas in yellow, contrasting ideas in blue. We'll make signing an example. We'll make that something nice and bright, maybe a pink there. And concluding and summarising, why don't we make that a green? Nice colours of the rainbow there. All right, so we'll read through this and we will actually look at the examples of using the transitional words and phrases and how that makes this piece easier for us to understand when we're reading through it. So public transportation is often used by university students for travel between their homes and university of place of study. There are many social, lifestyle and economic advantages to university students who use public transport. One of the most important social benefits of public transport is the way it helps to develop a sense of community. So you can see here, one of the most important is one of our signposts that this is our first idea, okay? And then you can see I've listed that over here, one of the most important. Excuse me. And then we'll keep reading and you'll see that some of these other signposts appear later for the addition of ideas, okay? So one of the most important social benefits of public transport is the way it helps to develop a sense of community. For example, so we can see here that's to signal that an example is being used. Okay. For example, when people travel together on trains or buses, they have the chance to interact with and get to know the people who live in their community. All right, so that does indicate that this is an example of what was spoken about beforehand. In addition to developing a sense of community, all right, so we've got now our next adding of ideas signpost. So in addition to developing a sense of community, public transport also encourages people to have a more active lifestyle, particularly when commuters, particularly we've got here again, signals that an example is coming in, particularly when commuters walk or cycle to their closest train or bus stop. Great, so we've got that example being used to show that it's good for a more active lifestyle. The economic benefits are equally important. So our next signpost that we're adding to the ideas of the advantages. The cost of public transport, for instance, signalling another example, is significantly cheaper than owning and running a car. Okay, so I just realized up here that I made that one the wrong color, but that's okay. So these, all the yellow, are showing the addition of ideas, and the for example, for instance, and particularly are signaling an example. So you can sort of see how these are scattered throughout this paragraph here, just to develop that greater cohesion. Remember this one, it was hard to tell the difference when we were moving from the social to the lifestyle to the economic benefits, because it didn't have those signposts. So you can go back and compare these two. Let's look at the next paragraph. So although public transport has various advantages, so this is good here because we're looking at comparing the advantages up here to the disadvantages down here. So we've got this contrasting word here. This is the one that should have been in blue. Although public transport has various advantages, using it also has a number of disadvantages for students. So this although just helps to signpost that we're going to now contrast these ideas. Whereas up here, it got a little bit confusing. Okay, it took us a second to realize that we were onto something a bit different, looking at the disadvantages instead of the advantages, because it didn't have that language to signpost the transitions. A specific disadvantage, and here using that language to signal that we're using an example again. A specific disadvantage is the time it takes to commute on public transport. It can take significantly longer to travel on a bus or train than to drive directly to the university from home. Furthermore, so we're adding here again, we'll highlight that in yellow, because we're adding to the disadvantages now. Furthermore, safety on public transport can be a concern for some students, especially if they have to travel late at night. So we've got that again to signal an example, the especially to introduce our example. So see again how they're scattered throughout that paragraph. Our last paragraph, remember we had trouble earlier identifying that this was the concluding paragraph. So when we look down here, it starts off immediately with in conclusion. So we know that this is going to be a summary or a restatement or conclusion of what we've spoken about earlier. In conclusion, public transport offers students a reliable and inexpensive means of attending university, and the advantages ultimately outweigh the disadvantages. So this is a nice summary and concluding word to use as well, ultimately, to show that, yeah, we do have more advantages than disadvantages. You can just see that in the physical sizing of the paragraphs there. Okay, but we had 3 here as opposed to 2. All right. So you can see that as I said earlier, the transitional words and phrases, they're scattered throughout the paragraphs here. They're used in a couple of different ways. So you can mix up your usage of transition words. Some of them are placed at the beginning of sentences. So you can see here, like in addition to, furthermore, although, in conclusion. So that's one of the easiest ways to add in transitional words and phrases, is to put them at the beginning of your sentences to signpost that you're moving into another idea, whether it's an addition of ideas or a contrasting of ideas, or to signal an example of your ideas, okay, or you're concluding your ideas. But if you want to make your writing a little bit more sophisticated and make sure that they blend nicely into it and don't become sort of too intrusive and obvious, and so that your sentence structures are varied a little bit, you can actually insert them within sentences as well. So you can see this one here, like we've got for instance, comes in partway through that sentence there, okay, and ultimately comes in through here and especially here. Equally important up here as well. So you can use them all the different functions, either within a sentence or at the beginning of a sentence. But just remember to try and vary that and change it up a little bit in your writing and in your speaking too, so that they look like you're using them a little bit more effortlessly and seamlessly in your writing. It just adds that level of sophistication. By doing that, the transitional words and phrases will serve their purpose without becoming too distracting or obvious. Okay?